Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today it's my pleasure to speak to you about the perils of mergers and acquisitions and how to turn these into pearls. The M&A utopia is two or more organizations integrating into one, where in best case scenario, both companies' views of the integrations are aligned. We all know that this is not always the case. And the stats prove this. Post-merger and acquisition failure rates are between 70 and 90%. This is defined as the merger not adding value or delivering the estimated benefits, and in worst case scenario, divestment. In a nutshell, the reasons are insufficient and flawed pre-merger evaluation, estimates of the synergies, and after-the-fact management of the synergies. McKinsey published that there is an acute lack of information, too little data to estimate the synergies properly, which comes from limited access to people. KPMG published that failures are related to mismanagement of their so-called 5 horsemen: risk, price, strategy, cultures, and management capacity. What's done relatively well are those areas of due diligence where we have access to exact data, the knowns. This includes legal and financial due diligence and some of the strategic, customer and product and services alignment information that is available or made available. What's done poorly is getting a better understanding of the unknowns, which are what I like to call the perils of M&A. These perils are the what and how the organization works, the way the organization executes on the strategy, the way the organization develops plans, uses technologies, follows processes, markets products and services, approaches customers, etc. Remember this slide. Going into a bit more detail, McKinsey's acute lack of information is due to, firstly, economies of scale, which requires improved efficiency and productivity from people. Secondly, best practice, which is about the way people work. And thirdly, the sharing of capabilities and opportunities, which is once again about people. KPMG's mismanagement is about people managing risk, price, and strategy, and people executing on the strategy. Cultures is all about people, or management capacity, once again about people. There are many other publications, including Forbes, that explained the one major thing that accounts for most failed deals is culture, cultural mismatch. And when buyers are investigating and verifying the company they propose to buy, the word culture is hardly ever mentioned. It's about people and people's behavior, which equates to an organization's culture. This is where most of the time the eyes start to glaze over, and I see my clients do that uncomfortable shift in their chair because they need to engage with people, which is hard, scary, and unpredictable. People may say something they don't want to hear. And so to make this a bit easier, and because most analytical people prefer exact data, I've put the culture equation together, which is as follows. But we're not talking about one organization, we're talking about two, and two different ones. So the equation for the M&A will more likely look like this. The expectations are key to people and culture, which is a missing piece. So remembering back to my calculus, the study of continuous change, I know that there is an operator of infinite integration and a transform function using the expectations. So a more likely equation is, well, as this equation is becoming too difficult, we need to fall back on ways we've investigated culture up to now. For simplicity, I'm going to focus on one organization for a few minutes, keeping in mind we need to know this for both companies. One of the ways to analyze culture is through interviews. 20, 30, 50 people are handed to the change consultants, which equates to less than 1% in larger organizations and up to approximately 4% in medium ones. However professional the consultant is, after 5 to 10 interviews, the interviewer starts to preempt when they hear comparable information and their own preconceived ideas and solutions come into play. It's just how the brain works. I'm not saying interviews should not be done. I believe interviews can be very valuable for additional information. Organizations also use surveys which can reach the whole organization and can cover a broad range of subjects. But I need to lift a veil about current surveys. They have problems, and big ones. You'll recognize these questions from the traditional employee engagement survey and the Net Promoter Score. If you've flown here, your airline may send you the bottom one if you haven't received it already. Traditional surveys are based on the so-called 5 or 10-point Likert scale, which was invented in 1932. 1932, the same year as the radio telescope, before the photocopy, and transistor radio 20 years later, let alone the desktop computer some 42 years later. But you gotta give it to the scale. It's easy to use, as it is based on simple subjective answers. No thought is required to design the survey responses. No thought whatsoever. For example, it's not required to define what useful feedback on performance actually is. It's left up to each respondent to define this, which is different for every single respondent. To be able to use the scale, emotive, positively and negatively charged questions have been developed to try and get information for which this survey was not made. Based on this, projects are developed to improve or bring teams together in case of M&As, and surprisingly enough, projects fail. Here's why. These surveys are focused on the past. Every time I think about this, I hear the investment disclaimer, past performance is not indicative of future results, or does not guarantee future performance. How often do you see this come up? A lot, right? The questions are not exact. What's useful for me is different to what's useful to anyone else. And if you ask someone what they would do, doesn't mean they will or that they have. Furthermore, the answers lack meaning. Agreeing to useful or a question about good culture doesn't say anything about what usefulness is or the cultural elements that are in place. Or the numbers. I'm Dutch. Our good is nothing above a 6. I grew up in the States. Their good is nothing under an 8. Let alone if I'm in a bad mood, my answer moves to a 5. Answers to emotive questions change even for the same person on different days. More importantly, the answers do not give any insight into actions that are required to improve. Even if we were to take all this as a given, the outcomes are actually unreliable. Let me show you what I mean by this. The Likert scale is a so-called ordinal scale, which is non-linear. This means the distance between answers is not the same. From neutral to agree, seemingly 1 point, is not the same size as agree to strongly agree. And as strange as this may sound, even on a 1 to 10 scale, from 6 to 7 is different from 8 to 9 because each person's view about agreeing is different. Parametric statistics are applied. This means the outcomes are averages, medians, standard deviations, so they can be put into bell curves. Bursting the bubble, or the bell in this case, parametric statistics requires a linear scale and as such cannot be applied to an ordinal scale. Unfortunately, this means that the trended historical data is incorrect too. You can imagine that survey providers do not want you to know about this. It's a waste of millions around the world on these types of surveys. Now that I've depressed you more than enough, let's get to the good stuff. How to turn these perils into pearls. As we saw before, what's needed is to know the what and how, the people, culture, and behavior insights of the two companies as part of the pre-merger evaluation. In other words, bringing the what and how above water. Remember, this what and how is the way the people in the organization execute on the strategy, the way people develop plans, people use technologies, follow processes, etc. We have established that the current Likert-style surveys are problematic and not the way to go. However, the only way to reach all employees of an organization is by using an online or paper-based questionnaire. The good news is there are currently innovative technologies, methodologies, and intelligence that are future-focused and specifically developed to provide immediately actionable insights throughout the organization. They can also identify internal expertise or the pockets of excellence within the organization that are otherwise not so easy to identify. I'd like to show you an example of the technology we use. This is an example of the outcome of a cultural analysis for two companies in an M&A. Company A aims to buy Company B. Both companies have 3 minds. The columns are the headers for 10 different cultural subjects, each comprised of 5 to 10 questions. The rows are the three minds for Company A and Company B. The top half shows the current state or the actuals in the organization. The bottom half shows the future expectations of the people in the organizations. The outcomes show that minds 1 and 2 of Company B are not doing well. There are also some issues in Company A. What's evident is that mind 3 of Company A is doing very well. This is what we call a pocket of excellence, which can be used as a resource to tap into. There's quite a difference in company values between the two companies, which include safety, integrity, and trust. So is this something you'd like to know before you purchase, or as a minimum, before you plan your integration? The application allows us to dig into the data by cultural subject and by organizational level. For example, performance management within the 3 mine operations departments of both companies is now compared. The columns are the headers for each question within performance management. The rows are the operations departments of each of the 3 mines for Company A and B. The top half is the current state, the bottom half are the expectations. Taking the first attribute, performance objectives, the question that was asked was, to what extent have your performance objectives been formulated? The question asks for a situational description, not a subjective statement like useful. Each answer is linked to a specific situational description. For example, the 3.5 means that the department has specified performance objectives, but not all work is covered. This applies to the other outcomes as well. There are clear descriptions of the current states and expected future states for all 60 cultural elements in this questionnaire, and these can be compared at company, mine, department, team, and even at crew level. Based on this, tailored actions can be developed to manage the integration and people's expectations. I've emphasized the people and cultural aspects and the related perils. I'm not saying that the other exact enterprise aspects aren't important. They are. I focus on the people and cultural aspects because they are taken for granted in most M&As. They require attention, and if done right, the people will become the pearls of successful M&As. In other words, what's needed is insights through new technologies, methodologies, and intelligence for cultural due diligence to complete the M&A evaluation, enabling better decision-making about the cultural fit, and if the M&A comes to fruition, effective integration through targeted change activities and the ability to use the areas of expertise and high-performing team within the companies to help the integration activities. Because the objective is integrating the companies successfully. Thank you.